Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us in this second talk today. We are delighted to have Nina Keath with us from City of Onkaparinga, and Nina is the Team Leader Sustainability. I had the absolute pleasure of listening to Nina at an event at the Seacliff Uniting Church earlier this year, and if this talk, or the talk I listened to, is anything to go by, you are in for a treat. I think one of the things that impressed me the most about Nina is her obvious passion for the subject area. Nina is employed to do a job, clearly, with the City of Onkaparinga, but it is clearly much more than just a job. Nina is a former graduate of RMIT in the area of environmental studies, worked as project manager for Clearwater in the area of integrated water management, then as a research fellow at Monash University in the National Urban Water Governance Program, then moved to South Australia to take up a position with City of Onkaparinga. And she has held roles as coordinator of Resilience South, and Nina will mention a little bit more about Resilience South and how they will have a stand that is seeking your input. She now holds, as I said, the leader of position of Team Leader Sustainability. One of the things which, looking at a web reference, Nina, that I really moved me was how she's taken a fundamental question from her days as a researcher into all she does. What are the ingredients required for transitioning societies from one set of deeply ingrained behaviours, practices and technologies to another? What a great question. Nina, thank you so much. Please join me in welcoming Nina.
Lovely intro. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Hope and compassion. People are often surprised when I tell them that as a... You can't hear? Let's see if this is going to work. No. How's that working for you? Is that loud enough?
Yes,
Great.
that's good.
Awesome. I'll start again. So people are often surprised when I tell them that I have hope about climate change. My hope is not blind. It's grounded in the fact that in the 15 years that I've been working in this space, I've seen enormous change take place. And I was really gratified in the last talk that Chris Daniels did. A man from the audience asked a question and made a comment where he said, 10 years ago he would have felt that there really wasn't much hope. But more recently, he's felt a shift in the way that people are responding. But people have been responding for a really long time. But they've largely been invisible. And these people are my colleagues in local government. I saw someone outside earlier and they said, what are you talking about? And I said, I'm talking about the action that councils are taking. And they said, do you mean the actions that councils aren't taking? And I thought, it's a real pity that these people are invisible because behaviour is contagious. I was a social researcher, and we know from the social sciences that behaviour is contagious. So if you see someone being kind and compassionate, you're many more times likely to echo those behaviours. And likewise for negative behaviours, you're more likely to echo those too. And it's unfortunate that the level of government that has traditionally taken the least action has been the one that has been getting the most attention and profiling. And so my job today is to shine a light on some of the amazing work that has been happening at the local level for many, many years, in the hope that for those of you who are struggling with your hope, it might invite you to engage with that. Climate anxiety is a recognised condition for a reason, and I too sometimes feel very, very worried and very sad. But I am surrounded by compassionate, humble, hopeful leaders, and I'd like to share some of that with you. So our community have been telling us for a long time that they're worried about climate change. These are survey results from back in 2017. And they've been telling us, we want to do something, we want you to do something, but we don't necessarily know what to do. And so I'll talk to you about some of the things that we've been doing to support our communities today. We recently re-surveyed our communities in 2021 at City of Onkaparinga, and the results are even stronger this time. Climate change came out as one of the top priorities for our community, and it wasn't just the greenies who said that, it's everybody. Public open space, the natural environments, that's what our community are telling us that they want us to work on. And we have been taking lots and lots of action for many, many years. And we have committed staff right across the organisation, not just within the sustainability team. I'm just going to shut this door. But climate impacts very inconveniently, they don't start and stop at council boundaries, and they also don't stop at national boundaries. And so it's been in our interests as councils to work collaboratively with other councils. And for those of you who heard Chris's talk this morning, when we're trying to deal with things like biodiversity, it's so important that we don't suffer from those boundary issues where you're doing some really great work for weed control, on one side of the boundary, and then it just all falls over on the other side. And so at Onkaparinga, we're part of Resilience South, which is a regional climate partnership. I had listed all the other regional climate partnerships operating across the rest of Adelaide previously. And we work with the City of Mitcham, so this council here, who have an amazing stall out there, City of Marion and Holdfast Bay. And even though they're not within my organisation, I count these people as my dearly beloved colleagues. We work together every day. And part of the thing about climate change is that what we're trying to do is new. A lot of what we're trying to do, we really don't know how to do it. And all of our institutions are set up around old values, old norms, old practices. And so all of our rules enforce these old values and norms and behaviours. And so groups like this, when one of the councils works out a new and better way of doing things, we're able to share that with the other councils and really help them to expedite and leapfrog action. And likewise, when we do something wrong, where we try something new and we're like, oh God, that really didn't work, we can all learn from each other and avoid replicating failures. And we need to have that efficiency and risk duplicating effort because the urgency is so high. So these partnerships, a lot of the work that they do is invisible, but it's so essential for learning and growth and change. Oh, and that was my little bit of homework I was meant to promote. We are developing a new regional plan for how the 4 councils and the state government will work together on climate action. And we have a stall out there with our coordinator for Resilience South, Stefan, taking feedback from you, our community, about what you would like to see in that plan. Please go and add your ideas because we really want to know from you what it is that you want us to be focusing on. We've got lots of knowledge and ideas about what we know we need to do, but we want to know what our community needs too, so that we can support you. So what have we done? To begin with, we have recognised that emissions reduction must be our #1 priority. The less we emit, the less risk we have to deal with and adapt. So some of you may be familiar with the concepts of climate adaptation and climate mitigation. So adaptation is recognising that climate change brings with it a whole lot of risks and we need to respond and adapt. Climate mitigation is saying, let's not have any more climate change, let's stop it. So let's mitigate the emissions. That's the basic concept. So we're very committed to doing all we can to bring our emissions down. Since 2010-11, City of Onkaparinga has reduced our emissions by 47% and our energy use by 33%. And we've committed to a emissions reduction target that I am hoping might get a little bit stronger because we have a new chamber, just like you guys do. in Mitcham, and we managed to get an 80% reduction by 2030. That was the target we could get through our old chamber. Our community have overwhelmingly elected 70% turnover of our chamber, and they've overwhelmingly elected climate-focused elected members. So who knows, we might have an even stronger target.
Where's the bottom of the council area?
So this is the Onkaparinga River. So this is.
That's the river, not a boundary.
No, that's the river. So this is urban heat mapping, and again, those of you who saw Chris's presentation, the City of Onkaparinga was the first council in South Australia to do heat mapping because we'd looked at climate risks, and we had learnt that some of you might not be aware of this, but heat waves are the biggest killer of all natural disasters, more than any other disaster combined. But we don't know about that because people die alone at home, and it's often the elderly and the vulnerable. So understanding what a big issue this was for our vulnerable residents, but also for our biodiversity and our assets and our infrastructure, heat's just bad news for everything. We commissioned this heat mapping, and it told us some really obvious things. So it's closer to the sea, it's cooler, greening and water make it cooler, but it also told us some things that were surprising. So this red patch here is actually dry earth, and so dry earth can be hotter than bitumen sometimes. The difference is that dry earth at night will very quickly cool, whereas bitumen will retain its heat and keep radiating it. Other things we learned, does anyone know what the hottest product in our urban environment is? Fake grass, that's right. So up to 13 degrees hotter than natural grass. And with it comes a whole lot of other environmental problems because you need to spray it because you can't mow it and weeds come up through it. And what do you do when it's reached the end of its lifespan? It just goes straight to landfill. And in government, we're constantly dealing with these tensions of trying to balance different community needs. So fake grass is a great example where we're getting one part of state government saying to us, so Chris Daniels is from Green Adelaide, a state agency that's all about cooler, greener, wilder. And they're trying to get greening into the landscape and incentivising councils to do more natural stuff. Another department is giving us really big grants to put fake turf in our sporting complexes. How do we balance those two community needs around, the opportunity for young people to get out and play sport on a great environment? It's really challenging, and every day we are having to come up against those competing needs. The heat mapping, as I said, taught us the value of urban greening and water in the landscape, and so we mapped that too, and using LiDAR, as Chris said earlier. And what we found is that canopy cover, so there's this magic number that the research says we want to aim for about 30% canopy cover. City of Mitcham, in fact, is the closest council, as far as I'm aware, to reaching anywhere close to that target. You can see here, Onkaparinga, we're averaging 12.5%, really not even close to what we need. And in some of our newer suburbs, it's 2%, less than 2%. So we have an enormous amount of work to do. And some work that some of my team have done, which is just amazing, is they've layered the heat mapping and the canopy mapping against our socioeconomic data, and then we prioritise our planting programs to the places where our most vulnerable residents live. And so they get trees first because we know that they're less likely to be able to afford air conditioning, and we can make them safer that way. And so we've got a structured process of rolling out greening across our streets and suburbs But the problem is that we are losing vast quantities of greening on private land, and there is no way that if we only stick to greening on streets and public land, that we will ever get anywhere close to that 30% cover. And I'll come back to that.
Excuse me?
Yes.
What's the rate on that map?
So that can be a little bit confusing. So this is actually height, it's not heat.
Height.
Yeah, so, and I think red is the highest, but it looks to me like it's red's highest, then blue, then yellow, then green.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
So we have set targets for canopy cover where this is not the space I work in, so I'm not sure what our target, like what a tree actually is, but we have vegetation cover targets and canopy cover targets. There's a lot of work going on in this space, and there's an opportunity to hear a fabulous talk later by Stefan, our Resilient South coordinator. He happens to have a background in academia looking at trees and greening, and I really encourage you to come to his talk because you can get right into the nitty-gritty, but he does it in a really engaging way. So we're not just focused on our urban areas, we're also in Onkaparinga blessed with vast areas of rural landscapes, but these have been highly cleared and degraded. And over the last decade, we've got the most amazing biodiversity team who've just poured their heart and soul into regenerating our natural areas. But again, we have very limited scope within our public land to be able to do that work. And it's all disaggregated. So as you would imagine, critters need pathways to get places, and Chris again talked about this earlier this morning. So we've invested in a large study looking at where are our biodiversity hotspots, where do we have the most opportunity to regenerate, and then we're trying to understand what can we do as a council to either work with landholders or do land buybacks, or we have a whole lot of land that we're selling off, making sure that we don't sell land that is going to be important for creating corridors. So we're really trying to get strategic and think through how can we regenerate nature, not just in our urban areas, but also in our rural areas. We've also been investing heavily in green infrastructure. So as you know, councils are all about roads, rates and rubbish. Traditionally, we have just built bitumen roads, concrete curbs, and funneled our stormwater straight out to sea, which you don't get any of the benefit of the water infiltrating and cooling your towns and your suburbs. It's also a disaster for the receiving waterways because they just get flushed with all of this polluted water. So there's been a real transition within local government over the last 20 years, moving to what's called water-sensitive urban design, where we're trying to bring water back into the landscape without increasing the risk of flooding and disease. The reason we set up our original drainage system was because people were getting typhoid and cholera. Bad news. We don't want that. So it's how we can set up effective drainage systems that allow the water to come in and improve biodiversity, but don't leave us with those problems. It's all hard work. But Mitcham are doing really, really amazing work in this space, and I would say they're the state leaders in water-sensitive urban design. They have done incredible pilots with permeable roads and permeable paving, where the water can actually flow through. They have tree inlets at the base of every tree along their curbs, putting in rain gardens around trees, all sorts of amazing work. And so again, through the Resilient South and the regional climate partnerships, we're able to learn from them. And when something works well, we're just like, great, thank you very much, we'll do that. We've also been working with SA Water and the Bureau of Meteorology to test smart irrigation techniques. So we can now wire smart irrigation so that it's directly linked to the Bureau. And SA Water are helping us improve our irrigation. So first of all, we don't use so much water. So you're much better off to water before a heat wave rather than during it. Previously, we were just kind of watering during it. Now we can get ahead of the game and get not just the greening effect, but also a cooling effect. We've never before irrigated for a cooling effect, but our understanding of urban heat now has caused us to create a policy where there's a website on a page on SA Water's website where you can go and find park havens that are purposefully irrigated in a heat wave so that you can go and find a natural area to stay cool. At the moment, for vulnerable communities, they have to go to a supermarket or a movie, somewhere where they have to spend money. So we're trying to create these havens that are free and allow people to get out and about.
Could you just go back?
Sure.
That, does that mean you're letting out water at different depths? Or what is that doing?
Most of what we're doing is putting temperature and moisture probes into the parks, and so then the temperature and the moisture probes, that goes back to fancy software that basically helps us to just make sure we're optimising our water use. And if we want a greening benefit, we might water this much. If we want a cooling benefit, we'll water this much. So data. We just love our data. It really helps us to make good decisions. So I said earlier that our communities are crying out for positive ways to engage, and many don't know what we're doing and how they can get involved. So we've created lots and lots of opportunities, and we do that again with all of the Resilient South councils. So if one council's doing a program, we'll offer it to all of our residents. So sign up to Resilient South so you can find out about some of the things we do. But we have climate ready schools, for example, where I went to Green Adelaide and said, oh, we've got all of this amazing data, heat mapping, tree canopy mapping, we've got all of this really, but how can we get it out past just council staff? And so we've created this program where school students learn about all of the data that we have, and then they design solutions for their grounds. And in some cases, they have built those solutions or created those solutions. And sometimes it's just a soft solution where they might do an energy audit, and one school that we worked with discovered that none of their solar panels were working. And so they saved their school thousands of dollars and were very proud of themselves. We also do things like work with the Red Cross to develop disaster resilience plans. Has anyone here been involved in any of that kind of work? Yeah. Yes, that's where I recognise your face from. Yeah, this is really important work. So we know that connected communities are resilient communities. If you know who your neighbours are and you can ring someone in a crisis, that's part of what's going to keep you safe. And so they do a lot of community building work, but also really understanding what your risks are. You can work with the Red Cross and with us councils to develop a disaster resilience plan for your community. I would recommend it for this area. You're exposed to, as you know, all of the storms and flooding and also bushfires here. It's really valuable work. Some of the other community work we do is work with artists, and we provide them with our data and invite them to interpret it through their art. And what I've found is they've been able to take highly technical data that's really inaccessible and not very easy or exciting to read and sum it up in just one image or a few snapshot images. And that's been so valuable for us to help people understand in different ways. And also engage with some of the difficult emotions that we are all having to experience around climate change. Climate grief is a real thing. You know, having art can help us deal with that despondence and the sorrow that we have. And there's lots of other stuff, but I should carry on. In Onkaparinga, we have a coastline, unlike here, and it's vulnerable to sea level rise impacts. We've been averaging 4 to 5 millimetres of sea level rise over the past few years, and it is projected to increase. For us, again, for those who saw Chris's talk, he talked about some of the early planners for our city. We had amazing early planners, and you know, we're building on their work. They put a big coastal park in between all development. So unlike the East Coast where you see those horrific visions of houses toppling into the sea, our early planners, they understood that it's not a good idea to build right up against this highly dynamic natural system. And so more or less, most of the infrastructure and assets that are at risk are public infrastructure, so roads and footpaths and things like that. But our coastline's highly erodible, and there's a lot of work that we're doing to map and monitor our impacts, and sometimes we'll increase our specifications, sometimes we'll retreat, it's all really hard work, but it needs to be done. So that's all the kind of physical risks that we've been responding to for many years. Back in 2017, a new set of legal, financial, what they call transitional risks emerged, which is where big business recognised, oh dear, this is not some fluffy environmental issue, this is a massive risk to our bottom line. And so they created guidelines, the business sector, these voluntary guidelines, they're called the TCFD, Task Force for Climate-Related Risk Disclosures. It's a boring acronym, but it has completely changed the way that we do business, both in the private sector and within government. I learned about it in 2017 at a conference, and I got so excited because I was like, finally we can get climate change out of the sustainability part of council and into the chief financial officer's thinking, our CEO's thinking. If we don't address these risks, we are financially and legally liable. So to get on the front foot, I invited a very scary lawyer who had been speaking at this conference to come and speak to our council, and I thought, well, it's no good if just one council does this work. So I invited 10 councils from the other regional climate partnerships, and I made sure that all of our executives and our staff were there so that we could have this collective understanding of this new set of risks. It has completely changed the game for council now. There is not a single person in council who doesn't think that climate change is part of their responsibility. It's embedded right across the organisation. People don't always know what to do about it, but they accept that it's a risk and that they should respond. So off the back of that work, we piloted these climate change governance assessments, which basically look at how well are we managing those risks in our long-term financial plan, in our asset management plans. Councils are under so much financial pressure. As you would know, the pressure not to increase rates is always there. When you're trying to insert new things and you don't have it budgeted, it's really hard. This kind of work allows us to show we have a massive legal liability in asset management, for example, and it gives councils the impetus to be able to fund it, which is what we're doing through the Resilient Asset Management Project. So assets just came out as a huge gap for councils everywhere. We're building all of these roads and buildings, and we are not factoring in climate risk into those decisions. And so we're now working with the CSIRO and a whole lot of economists to try and understand the resilience funding problem. You know, how do we build the case, the business case for investing in long-term solutions? You know, politicians always struggle with this challenge of short-term cycles. You know, so we're working really hard with our 4 resilient councils to try and demonstrate that value for investing in long-term good infrastructure decision making, so that we can do all of that great stuff, all of the greening and the, you know, more sustainable development. How am I going for time? Do I need to?
It's okay.
Okay. But we wouldn't be doing our job if we were only focusing on council assets and infrastructure. Most of our area is actually private land, and so we have very little control in councils. People think that councils approve development. We do approve development, but we have no control around what the development looks like. We've just moved to a state-based planning system, and here's the thing that I want all of you to do, or people that you know who are really great writers or advocates. We transitioned to this state-based planning system about a year or 2 years ago, and so councils have now lost all ability to be able to require sustainability outcomes within our developments. We can only approve what's in the state code. The state government are under enormous pressure from developers to just do short-term affordable housing. The problem is, short-term affordable housing doesn't lead to long-term affordable living. We need our communities to have long-term affordable homes, and that's when you design sustainable homes that are oriented correctly, are properly insulated, have urban greening around them, all of the good things that we know and love. We can't require that as councils. So the new code's currently being reviewed right now. Councils, Green Adelaide, everyone's putting submissions in, but we are up against a really strong developer lobby. having community members put a submission in, even if it's just saying, hi, I'm Joe Blogs, I would like our planning system to support sustainable and climate resilient development, even that is worthwhile. Go to the Planning SA portal, just do it. You can do more detailed stuff if you want, and Stefan, who's doing a talk soon, will talk all about what the planning system needs from a trees perspective. But this is a real challenge for us, and in those governance assessments that we did, the planning system was identified as one of our biggest risks for councils because we are building in vulnerability at the moment, we are building in risk for our communities, and we don't have a way to control it. So this is a real challenge for councils, because we will be the ones when homes are flooding or residents are dying in their homes from heat exposure, we will be the ones that need to be responding to that. So to that end, we have a large parcel of land down in Onkaparinga that's coming onto the market. It's government-owned land. When I saw that, I thought, right, here's our opportunity. We don't have it in the code, but because it's government-owned land, we can ask the government to require higher standards and show it as an example of best practice. So we work really closely with our community, with our local businesses, showing that there's strong appetite, because you'll often get this message that, well, you know, only the wealthy want, you know, can afford it. It's not true. So we developed this fancy prospectus that just laid it all out, and we used lots and lots of quotes from fancy people with fancy titles from the region business people, and the state did commit to requiring the highest sustainability standards in this development. And then politics, they put a train line right through the middle of it. So I don't know what's going to happen, but we're keeping on going with really trying to push that message that we need to do better in our building. This is my last slide. So prior to COVID, you'll remember, children everywhere were protesting, and they were saying, please adults, please don't leave this problem to us. Please, coming back to my last slide, please choose hope and compassion. And this is going to be very unbureaucratic of me, but I would even say, please choose love. You know, we need to operate from that space if we are going to have any success in our climate response. Love for each other, love for nature. Please do that. I really don't like it when kids are told, well, hopefully you'll do better than us. I hear that at conferences all the time. It enrages me. I know that we can take action, and I know that because I see all of my amazing colleagues doing it every day, and the people out here who are showing their amazing work. So on that note, I will finish. Let's all take hope and compassion filled and love filled action together. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your wonderful talk, Nina. Unfortunately, I wasn't here for all of it, but the last part was truly beautiful and very hopeful. You mentioned earlier in the talk about climate grief and climate anxiety and how it's emotionally affecting people, and those twin things are anxiety and depression. I can't think of a better antidote to depression and a sense of hope for the future, a better antidote to anxiety, to taking action. And it's absolutely brilliant to hear the actions that our councils are taking and making really positive changes. And I guess that's kind of what we're trying to do today, to give people options and possibilities of taking action. So, Nina, thank you so much. Now, questions, and just to prime you up, to enthuse you about asking the best possible question, there are gifts for the two questions that Nina likes the most. So ask your questions.
I'll even take comments.
You talked right at the beginning about transitioning to a different way of society. Does council have a role in sort of educating the community? And what sort of things is Onkaparinga doing to try and help that transition?
Could I just ask if everyone heard the question? Maybe restate it, Nina.
Andrew asked at the beginning, I had talked about, well, I think it was in the intro actually, this question of how we transition society is. So just for context, my old research was, it came out of the water sector where there was really high appetite for doing more sustainable practices. So moving from old drainage systems that were very narrow focused to these more diverse systems that I was describing. And we had policies in place saying, yep, we're going to do it. You survey water professionals, they all say, yep, we love it, and no one could get it done. And that's because, as I said, all of our legislation, our rules, our norms, our training, our skills, and our existing infrastructure systems were locked in around those old institutional values. And so we were studying what are the ingredients involved in making change. And I wish I could say, well, it's as easy as 1, 2, 3, ABC, but it's not. But one of the things that we know about making change is in the literature, they call it niches. So, so if you think about society as having several levels, where you've got kind of what they call the landscape level, which is where, you've got your landscape, your natural landscape, or your big infrastructure systems. That's where the level of all your social norms, political kind of processes. It's where big macroeconomic decisions get made. It's those big things that exert influence on us in our daily life. And then you've got the level of regimes, like where all the institutions operate. So in the water sector, that would be things like water utilities, councils, consultants, regulators, all the people that make that system work. And they're designed to be stable because that's what gives us a stable society. But the problem is they're really hard to shift because we've got everything set up to be stable. And so if you want to make a transition, there's lots of different transition pathways. One way that a transition can happen is a crisis at that landscape level. So it might be a mass bushfire, or it might be a big change in like the Me Too movement. You could say that's a landscape pressure that's been exerting pressure on our institutions to, shift our approach to gender. So if there's a new practice ready and waiting at the time that we get that landscape pressure, then you can kind of insert that new practice. If there's not, you can get chaotic outcomes. And so if you're trying to intentionally create a transition, the research has shown if you have these niches of passionate people, like all of the people in this room, who get really well networked and are experimenting and innovating and coming up with new visions for the future and trialling new things and making strategic links with all of the decision makers within that institutional regime, if you have that and then your crisis happens or some other window of opportunity, you have a much higher likelihood of being able to make that change. And so most of my work, I never talk about this transition theory. Like, I've never talked about it. I hope it made sense. But that's basically what I'm doing. I'm using social theory. So those regional climate partnerships, they are little innovation niches. We're part of the traditional regime, but we're trying new things and we're instilling new values into the system so that as crises emerge, we can try and push through that rapid change. But what we also know is that for change to take place, if you think about change as kind of like an S-curve where, existing practice, change process, embedded in new practice, this bit of the line, you can't see any change happening. You just don't see any outcomes. And so for politicians and policymakers to fund that bit can be really challenging because that phase is all about getting agreement on the problem. So that's where you're investing in new science and new data. We've done that. Tick. We now know that. Building new skills, new governance arrangements, new norms, new practices. But again, it's all sort of invisible stuff. It's only when you get to the very top of that S-curve that you start seeing the on-ground outcomes with different ways of building, different ways of delivering our assets. And so part of our job in local government is to build the case for doing all of that invisible work. And part of that is supporting our communities to do that learning themselves. So we're very intentionally working with communities through all those programs I mentioned before and more to understand the problem, to build their skills and capacity, to put pressure on the regime so that something I don't know if community understand enough is that we rely on community to tell us what we should do. That's how democracy works. And so unless we have a really strong voice from the community demanding that we respond to, biodiversity issues or deal with our weed management, it's very hard for us to veer from roads, rates and rubbish. So we need to support our community and bring them along on that change journey. That was a very long answer. I hope it made sense. Yeah.
You're talking about the landscape, the top layer and
Yeah.
the landscape, and that's the set, and that's the way it is. It strikes me that the landscaping aspect doesn't recognise that we are in crises. There is a crisis. It's not a question of waiting until, this comes up and, a crisis happens and then we'll change it. We're already in crisis, and the landscaping's not recognising there is a crisis. The climate change is
that's
a crisis.
right. And so
Yeah.
we are in crisis now.
But the
And-
landscaping doesn't recognise, so when you're trying to get the people to come up, you're sort of like coming into this brick wall all the time to say, no, there's no crisis, there's
Well,
no crisis.
and that is where you result in chaotic outcomes. So we're seeing that in New South Wales, where they're having their big crises and their institutions haven't been ready. So they were not in a position to be able to respond to that crisis. And a really interesting example of where the other thing that can happen when you have so climate change, that operates at that landscape level. That climate change is one of those forces that influences our institutions. If you don't have a better alternative at the time of the crisis, you can further entrench and lock in old values and norms. So what's happened in New South Wales is they were really trying to create more of a focus on prevention and resilience building. So let's, do all of that stuff around connecting communities, building better homes in better places, all of that work. But as we know, that work is slow and invisible and takes time. They got slammed with all the floods, so they created this agency called Resilience New South Wales, got slammed with the floods. Everyone was like, well, what are you doing? You haven't done anything. Got rid of that, and they've now got, I can't remember what it's called, but it's a new agency called, I don't know, emergency response or something, which at the moment in Australia, 97% of all of our disaster risk funding goes into recovery. It is the wrong way around.
Yeah.
We need to flip that balance. So we had an attempt to flip that balance and put the money into the resilience building so we don't have the problems in the long run. The crisis came, weren't ready. It re-entrenched the old values.
And aren't what they're trying to rebuild back to the old way? So they're just setting themselves up for further.
Well, that's right.
Disasters,
And that's where, and the other thing that we know is you can't do good thinking in a crisis.
No.
It's just not possible. And so one of the other roles that we need to do in council is to do that good thinking before a crisis comes and to do that good thinking with our community. And so that's exactly what we're trying to do with the Resilient South plan that we're developing out there. Please do go and have your say. It really does help us. Because in South Australia we are in the fortunate position that we're able to build the momentum from other people's crises. So because there's the flooding and the bushfires going on the East Coast, we're able to take, this sounds awful, but that builds awareness and motivation amongst South Australians, and we aren't in that position yet. And so we can do that good planning with clear heads.
And I think we had a question.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, you told us to write to some people to make change. Can you clarify again who I need to write to?
Oh, yeah, it's Plus. I don't know why it's called Plus. If you just Google, I need to find a way to, I really don't know. Planning SA, it used to be, and now it's called Plus. Not sure what that, Planning and Land Use Services or something. But if you just Google the review of our planning system, like basically we've got a new code. It's being reviewed. I'll find out. I don't know how to. Have you got a newsletter or something?
One thing that may answer and maybe give some more, as a follow-up to today's event, we're going to be putting recordings of each of the talks on the website, together with a whole host of action-do possibilities. and we could actually include
perfect.
that specific
good.
link on it. So
Yeah,
if
because
Nina provides it,
I
we'll put
don't
it on.
actually know, and it's horrible. And this is the problem. A lot of our engagement processes are hard to access, and you get in there and you're just like, oh, I don't know how to navigate this.
And we had a question.
I get upset when I see areas of land, private land, for sale, and the developers come in and they build houses roof to roof edge, paving all around, not even enough room for weeds to come up. And I think, can't councils, can they afford to, are they able to, buy private land and make it council land so they can make trees or parks or biodiversity, put in wetland, rather than the developers grab it? Can you save it from the developers? I put a levy on people's race. If everyone in Mitcham Council, for example, gave an extra bit of $2 or whatever amount to save these big tracts of private land, so the council can buy them and increase the biodiversity, but not because the land under houses and roads is dead land. Nothing can live under it.
The problem is people need to live somewhere.
People need homes.
People
Yeah.
need homes.
Build up.
But it's about building better. We need to build better, and that was why I was saying we really need to influence the planning review so that the houses that we build are beautiful, biodiverse places that do contribute to. I thought Chris's point this morning was so important. We are not separate from nature. We are nature. We are part of nature. And we need to stop behaving as though we're separate. We can do that by creating beautiful environments. We have built an eco home. My brother-in-law is on the back. He has built an eco home. You can do it, and we need to set the system up so that it makes it easy for everyone, not just the passionate people. Then, because what I also hear, and this may be familiar to some of you. Often when people go into those show homes, the ecologically minded ones will be asking for a white roof, or they'll be wanting double glazing, or whatever it is, the elements that they know. And the salespeople will say, oh, but that's much more expensive. Are you sure you want to do that? Or, oh, but black roofs are so in right now. And, and they have to actually work very hard to get the thing that they want, because, and this is about the power of social norms. It's so pervasive, and so part of all of our job is shifting those social norms so that it just is the norm, and that requires change at so many levels.
That brings us to the end of the time we
Could I-
have
sorry,
available
excuse me.
in this.
Let's just put a little plug in here.
Yes.
Talk about building sustainably. If you're interested in building sustainably or renovating sustainably, go and visit the Sustainable Communities stall over the way here. We've got a lot of information available to help.
Thank you very much, Andrew. For those who don't know, Andrew has been a member of our organising committee and absolutely a brilliant exponent of living more sustainably with Blackwood Sustainable Communities. So thank you. Thank you for your attendance. Now, the question is, two favourite questioners.
Well, I have to give the question, even though I answered it really badly, to the lady who asked about putting in a submission. You get 10 out of 10.
Must be chocolates for you.
Thank you.
And the next one?
I think I'm going to go with the lady in the white shirt because I was really pleased that you
was
were. I
that,
really liked the fact that you were engaging with this
With-
question of understanding change processes, because that is what we all need to understand how change works so that we can do our little bit. There's no one silver bullet. Each of us has these, and if we're all doing it, it does make a difference.
And finally, we thank Nina. Nina, thank you so much. A small token of our appreciation for your talk and your willingness to contribute to today. Isn't it magnificent to have people with passion and vision working in such positions? Nina, thank you. And please continue to think about coming to talks. Next one at 1 o'clock, and it should be good. Avail yourselves of food and other things outside.